Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Hello, Omaha.
Okay. All right. There we go.
Just Omaha.
You got it. Great intro today. How's everybody doing?
Yeah, doing well.
Feeling cold.
Chilly.
It is a chilly day.
It's chilly weather, and
in
it's chilly weather.
Omaha.
I see what you did there.
Yeah.
Don't leave those cinnamon rolls out.
Yeah. Get your. That's like, it seems like a Midwestern thing, right? No,
Chili and cinnamon rolls?
Chili and cinnamon rolls.
Are you a fan? Jess?
Making things in the crock pot? Yeah,
No,
I like to make white chicken chili personally.
And
Never
cinnamon
had that.
rolls?
I do make cinnamon rolls.
Not
too.
the
Like
same,
together,
like
I'm
together
saying.
though.
Do you combine the two?
Not usually.
Is that what
But
Runza's doing over there? Is that what they're getting up
Runza's
to?
doing- I
They're
feel like
pouring
that
the
is a
chili
tradition, though.
on the
No,
People
cinnamon
do
rolls.
that. It's a thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing.
Like you pour
Austin,
it on.
Our producer, I know he is
Oh,
into.
I know. I know people wonder what he looks like. Very handsome.
And he
That's
likes
why-
chili and cinnamon rolls.
That's why
That's his entire diet.
he
Chili
only
and
eats cinnamon rolls, like on a certain day of the week.
Yeah.
Or,
I don't know, just through the winter.
I wish one day we'll make them up and we'll know.
I'm more of
Right.
a chili and cornbread. Like that's kind of
Ooh, yep,
that
yep.
one goes together.
That's a good one.
Or peanut butter on bread with chili. I don't know why I always liked that growing up. I think it's because my dad ate it that way. So,
Oh,
yeah.
nostalgic.
Anyways, do you have a
interesting.
voicemail, Alex?
We've got
Sometimes we have
a
those.
voicemail. Here's the voicemail. It never fails and makes me want to.
Okay. Okay.
Hey guys, it's Natalie, and so I'm just wondering if you had since we're in the middle of Christmas, if there was maybe a Secret Santa gift or maybe a white elephant gift that you didn't like and maybe couldn't get rid of. If you didn't like it and like what it was, or
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe somebody, I don't know. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what that was.
All right.
Stories. I always love stories. So
There.
talk to you guys later.
And
Bye.
Alex loves to tell stories.
Yeah. He
All right,
does.
I got a
He's-
story for you guys.
Hey,
I
Heard
oh.
Austin, though. Austin loves stories. He usually falls asleep after this portion of the podcast.
I got one right away. I got a white elephant gift from a resident here at the church,
Okay.
and it was just this orange like rotary dial phone that was screwed onto a board, and I think it was maybe from like, I don't know, somewhere in Minnesota, maybe Crown College, like from the olden days or something. I'm not sure. There's some connection
So
there.
was that part
I'm-
of
I
a
don't-
gift exchange?
It was like a white elephant.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not that I didn't like it. I actually liked it. I liked it so much it's hanging in my office, like on my wall. So
that's
one's-
where that came from.
Yeah.
Cool.
So shouts out to Ian, friend of the
Oh.
podcast. But yeah, that's probably my favorite white elephant gift. I guess I've gotten some bad ones like plungers and stuff like that.
That's the question, though.
Yeah.
Not your favorite white elephant.
I know. I
gift.
just didn't have a bad one. I couldn't remember. I just couldn't think of it. So I had to share my favorite. Okay, I was being positive. for once.
Ironically, I'm just trying to think of how much I should share here because I've gotten myself in trouble before.
Do you want to keep thinking and I can share?
You share, and I'll keep thinking. I'll keep
the last
praying for wisdom.
The last white elephant gift I got majorly let down by because they don't come around too often, but it was a lava lamp. And I really wanted it because I feel like I always wanted a lava lamp
love
and I
that.
never got one. So I took it home, opened it up, plugged that baby in, and it didn't work. And I
What
still
didn't
think
work,
about
the
it
lamp
every
or
once
the
in a while.
lava?
The lamp and the lava. And
Wow.
That's why
I still think about it, how I always wanted a lava lamp and it did not work. And I thought I had one.
Someone's going to
was
bring you a
old.
lava lamp now that they've heard this.
Can we just talk about when people get the two ideas just mixed up? When it's supposed to be like a gift exchange and you're like, okay, whatever the gift exchange limit is, and you sincerely bring like your best $10 gift or you're thoughtful and creative, and then you get stuck with something that's less than that. I was having a conversation with some friends the other day, and they were just talking about a gift exchange, and they were like, I I just know I'm going to get stuck with the bad gift. Every year they get stuck with this specific gift giver's gifts.
Oh.
And they are kind of repulsed by it.
So this person's
What
good
is
at
it?
giving gifts.
Taxidermy or
No.
something?
And then there was someone gave socks one. There's like
used
in my
socks?
community
'Cause
group.
you do like socks.
In my
I
community group,
remember.
there's like a knitted socks that someone won at like a mops thing once, and then they started like giving those away. And so every year they kind of show back up as like a joke. But usually people give, and there's like a candle, a squirrel candle, and they keep showing up. But they give them with like a gift card too, because I think they feel bad. But I don't. Man, what is the worst white elephant gift? I don't know. I just feel like I don't do a lot of white elephant gifts. I will say, and Secret Santa last year.
Okay,
so at
now
the church,
you're moving to Secret
Well, she
Santa,
asked
which
both.
we didn't get. Okay.
She asked both. So last year I was disappointed. I will put it on record in my Secret Santa gift. And maybe the
That you
problem is it's
received?
Secret Santa at church. Yeah, here. So we do a gift exchange. You don't have to. You can sign up for it. And I received
The
a
staff
book,
does,
a good
not the
book.
whole-
It's a great
the whole.
book. Great book. But it's a book I already had.
The Bible.
And so I'm like, why did I fill out the form of
Oh,
things that I
wow.
like? And then why did I get this book? Because this book was nowhere on the list. And so that's always kind of a bummer too, when like you
I can
fill out
see-
specific
okay,
answers
this
and then
is
you
what
get something
you're
different.
Also leaving out that I know about you is that you are a good Secret Santa gift.
I am a
giver.
good
Because I know that I've never been the recipient of you, but I've seen you give people other gifts that just melt their hearts.
Yeah.
I'm not being sarcastic. I have.
I'm
seen
a
it.
heart melting and it's probably because my birthday's on Christmas.
That's probably it.
I'm like, and my beard is getting grayer. I'm
I
like
see.
a regular old Santa.
Science is all
Can
there.
you- yeah. Well, anyways,
Yeah.
hopefully that answered.
Anybody else have a great story? Make sure you let us know or call
Natalie,
us with another
tell
question.
us what yours is.
Yeah, what's your worst?
Yeah.
We didn't do very good at our worst
Well, I
white
feel-
elephant gifts. So
I feel bad because I'm like, the gift givers might be listening. So
well,
that's
it's a
where I'm
white
trying to-
elephant. It's supposed to be bad.
Yeah, the Secret Santa. I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know who
Secret
it was.
Santa. Yeah, yeah.
Great book.
Yeah.
Highly recommend it. Just I already had it and it wasn't anything on my list.
You highly recommended
But
it. and we don't
that
know
number
what
you
it
can
is.
call anytime.
That's
To
right.
leave us a
Yes,
voicemail.
do
Glad to
tell.
have one back this week because we didn't have one last week. 402-885-9930. Again, 402-885-9930.
Give us a call.
Get those Secret Santa gifts ready. And what's next, Eric?
What?
Headlines? I don't know. I was trying to.
Yeah, it is
Throw it to
actually.
you.
I appreciate that. You know, sometimes you got to throw things so someone can catch them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Up next
Yeah.
is headlines. Thanks, Alex. Our first headline comes from WOWT.com. Some local news here. It says Omaha Police tracking excessive speeding across the metro. All you speeders better watch out. This says excessive speeding is not a new problem to the metro, but Omaha police are doing what they can to try to combat the issue. Sunday night, the OPD traffic unit was monitoring speeders on West Dodge, specifically between Interstate 680 and 156th Street. This is a quote from Sergeant Adam Turnbull. It says they, stopped several people traveling in excess of 100 miles an hour.
That's wild.
100 miles per hour in the 55 zone. So yeah, it shows. There's a tweet by OPD Nightlife that shows one of their radar capturing speeds from 102, 103, 107, 111, all the way up to 111. So that's really fast. What is happening?
What is happening?
I don't think my car could go.
Probably not.
I'm afraid.
Don't try. Don't test it right now.
I'm not.
You're
You
gonna
know
get.
I'm not.
You're gonna get caught. I had to search for this article, and this is how I found this one because I've been going home, and they're on the on ramp onto Dodge and then onto 680. I've seen like 6 police cars just lined up,
Yeah.
ready to get on. So I'm like, oh, somebody's clocking people.
Yeah.
But it's been pretty often, so that's pretty fast though. I don't think I've ever literally pushed my car into the hundreds. I don't even know if I've gone 90.
Yeah. What's
that say?
It's really fast.
That's just fast.
What's everybody's? I mean, I know Alex's, but I'll ask it anyways. I know his like mantra about speeding. I've heard it several times.
I have a mantra about speeding.
Yeah, you do. You have a reputation.
good.
I mean, I would say I'm typically like a 5 to 10 over, depending on. I just don't pay that close attention. I kind of try to go with the flow of traffic, but I'm not. I get so frustrated when I feel like, okay, I'm already going a little over here, and you're riding in the back of my car.
Yeah.
Like you're going so fast, and then you pull over, and it's like, whoa, just lightning.
Is that why you have the "Are you following Jesus this closely" bumper sticker?
Yeah, I have 2 of them just so they can make sure they see them.
One on the left and the right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you? What are you, Jess?
I'm like a 5.
Yeah, 5 over.
If I'm setting the.
If you're running late, you're like,
If I'm
I
running
gotta
late,
get somewhere.
Yeah, but I do think it's like speed of traffic. Like there are some times where I'm like, oh, I'm going 75 and I didn't realize it.
Yeah, because
But
you're
I'm
kind of just going with the flow.
in the zone.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you guys ever have that moment where you're just in the car and you know you're parenting your children and your child looks up at the sign, looks at your speedometer, looks up at the sign, looks up at your speedometer, and he realizes the two don't line up. And then
Has
you
this
just,
happened to
you
you?
just say, "Daddy, why are you going faster? Why are you breaking the law?" And you're like, you know, this law is meant to be broken. And then you just start to wonder why, you know, every
just
other
said
thing.
that?
It's like, you know, how far is too far? Well, you know, just a little over the regulation is okay.
Just
No,
a little cocaine.
just a
is
little.
okay.
No, I'm kidding. I would often in middle school ministry, especially to parents, like talk about just that idea because it's one of those simple ideas. Because how far is too far is like the classic
Oh yeah.
middle school question. And sometimes what we model there is, you know, it's different, you know. So one of my convictions is like around speeding. And it's not like I never do speed, but I try like not to. So like a lot of times if I'm caravanning or driving places and people are like, we want to get there 40 minutes faster and sin for 8 hours.
Alex is the
Sin
caboose.
for 8 hours.
then
Alex is the caboose, and he better have a working GPS.
then they're like, I don't want you to drive. And so, but
So
you
what's
know,
your mantra?
That's it.
that's it.
Go the speed limit.
Go to the speed limit.
It's sinning
Oh.
to go over.
Yeah. Yeah.
So watch out. Yeah.
So
it's-
will
I
you call if you're a passenger and Eric's driving, say to Colorado, and he was going 5 to 10 over? Would you say something if you're on a little road trip?
It probably it's relational, you know.
So you would say something maybe to Austin.
Maybe. No, I mean, I just
If
probably not going to
probably
say
if it was
something
5
anyway.
over, he wouldn't say anything.
It's
but
one
if
of
it
those
was
things
10
that
over,
it's
he'd
one of
be
those
like,
things. It's
okay.
like my conviction.
It's your personal
Yeah.
conviction.
And so I'm not like I'm not like monitoring everybody else. And
Okay.
like if it's one of those things, if asked, then I'll talk about it. But I'm not just like
Are
walking
you
in and
passive aggressive, like holding the little lever?
no.
Okay.
But I will say that this stretch on Dodge is one of the most frustrating for me.
Yeah.
Because Dodge goes from like because I take this almost every day, like goes from 70 most of the time, and then all of a sudden it hits 65 really quick, and it's like 65 for like 5 feet between 156 and then like 150th, and then it's 55.
Dodge Street.
And no, so like the flow of traffic, to Eric's point, usually is continually moving at that pace.
Yeah. They're
And
not
then-
slowing down
yeah, not
for the
slowing
change.
down.
Yeah.
Unless it's like traffic for school. And so it is one of those frustrating places where it's easy, I think, to just kind of keep following traffic and be like, what happened all of a
Yeah.
sudden here? So
And
easy
anytime
to
that
do.
somebody's like 156 to even 180th, I'm thinking they're heading towards the hospital if
Yeah.
they're flying down Dodge Street.
man, maybe this is we'll tell a difference in the excessiveness of
Yeah.
102, 103, 107, and 2 111s.
Yeah.
You're not going with the flow of traffic at that
No,
point.
no, you're not. That's just ridiculous. All right. One more quick little fun headline from relevantmagazine.com. It says David Crowder's house was used for the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special. I mean, most people probably know who David Crowder is. Pretty famous, well-known Christian
Yeah.
music
Been around
artist.
for a while.
And if you're not familiar with Guardians of the Galaxy, that's a Marvel comic series that's been turned into a movie series. And they have a Christmas special coming out. I think it comes out on November 25th on Disney Plus. And in this article, it pretty much Marvel approached David Crowder at his home and said, "Hey, we want to use your house for this Christmas special." And he obliged. He had a few questions like, "Are you going to blow things up? Because you guys like to blow things up. Please blow up my house," he said. And he's like, the other side of it, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, like being Christmas time. He says normally he wouldn't be a Christmas before Thanksgiving type person, but his whole house was like decked out in Christmas decor that Marvel supplied. But the whole premise of this Christmas special is that the gang, the Guardians of the Galaxy group, they want to get their leader, Star-Lord, a gift for Christmas, and he's missing Earth because they're out in the galaxy there, and so they think the perfect gift is to bring him Kevin Bacon, and so they're pretty much going to Earth to kidnap Kevin Bacon, and Kevin Bacon lives in David Crowder's house. So for this movie, that's not a plot point, but
That's not
actual
no spoilers.
Also not
actual
related to
house.
Congressman Don Bacon either. right?
No.
I don't know that for sure. But like, if there's that famous game that even gets referenced in here, which is 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, and it's like pretty much saying that all actors are 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon, and so now David Crowder mentioned in this article that he's pretty excited that he won the game. He's like 1 degree of separation because Kevin Bacon was living in his house for this filming.
That is fascinating. Every time I think of David Crowder, I just think of, the debate. How He Loves, that song. You know?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most well-known
he
songs
rewrote.
He
He
wrote
rewrote
it
the
to
lyric.
"Unforeseen Kiss" from Sloppy Wet Kiss.
Yeah. Because that's more K-Love friendly.
Yeah. And, well, he asked for permission. I think John Mark McMillan wrote it originally, and it's that line, "Heaven meets earth like a sloppy wet kiss,"
And all your like more progressive churches, they're like stick by that line. They don't
Say
change
sloppy.
it. Sloppy wet kiss.
Sloppy wet kiss.
Okay, yep, just like that.
It's not even the
That's how it goes. That's the melody. I don't know what song you're singing, but it sounds good.
That's the karaoke version.
But if you're interested, I mean, maybe you could tune into that. I don't know if I'm probably going to watch it. That might be fun. I don't know if there's going to be any sloppy wet kisses, but
I doubt it.
Yeah.
If he's involved.
But
Yeah.
maybe.
yeah,
Just unforeseen.
maybe unforeseen.
You're not
kiss.
going to ever see him.
Sneak
Although
attack.
unforeseen kiss seems like maybe a bad thing too. Like I don't want an unforeseen kiss, to be honest. Like, just
What if
like,
you were like pleasantly surprised?
just you walk around a corner? Oh, I'm getting a kiss. That's weird.
Unless it's
You
a
wanted
gift,
it.
like a chocolate kiss,
Yeah,
then maybe.
yeah.
I'll take
Or
it.
a
If you
white,
if
white
someone leaves
elephant gift you didn't want.
an unforeseen kiss on my desk, that's fine. But, all right. Up next, we get the opportunity to sit down with a guest from CityCare Counseling. Nate Seadore is his name, and he's a counselor over at CityCare, and we have a chat about overcoming family conflict. So stick around for that. All right, today on the podcast, we have Nate Seadore from CityCare Counseling. Nate, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I've been licensed for about 11 years. Been over at CityCare for 7. I also have the duties of clinical director, and so do spend a lot of my professional life over in that building. I'm married. I have 4 kids. They keep me honest and gray, and my hair recedes a lot because of them, but they are great.
Did they take that responsibility lightly that they're making their father's hair fall out?
They take it poorly.
Yeah.
They are very concerned. Every time I get a haircut, they say, "Don't be bald."
That's a lot of pressure.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I blame it on God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kids are pretty rough that way. They can be brutally honest. Mm-hmm.
Well, did you tell them if they make fun of you, then they might get mauled by a bear? That's
Okay. And
Like, every time I
that
had,
is
like,
why
a-
we're having the discussion
no,
we're
because
having
there's a
today.
passage in Scripture with Elijah, and and they're making fun of him for being bald, and then he 6 bears on them.
Wow.
And like every time you're with like a bald youth pastor, they love that's like their favorite
Sure.
story. Not that we have one at Christ Community Church named Brad Mock, but he
He's bald?
loved to. I mean, he's
A little
going
bit?
there. So if you ever kind of give him a jab. Anyway, I digress. So part of why we want to have this conversation, we had a listener just kind of ask a question a few weeks ago as they were in dialogue about just death, because we're talking about eternity as a church right now, and they got in conversation about, hey, how do we start to have wills and talk about after we die, and then who would take care of our kids? And they got into somewhat of a conversation, it seems, with friends of like, how do we start to make those decisions as a couple, maybe a husband and wife, when maybe there's trauma in the family, or there's parts of a family like I just wouldn't want them to be a part of life if we passed, like them inheriting my kids and what they would do, or just origins of sin and all that kind of stuff is kind of what they talked about. Origin of brokenness, trauma. Sorry, I was trying to find the words in there, and they would not want to leave their kids with that. And so that kind of is what led into some of this conversation. And last week we had someone come on and talk more of like a lawyer come talk about wills and how we have that conversation. But from more of the, I think, counseling side and therapy, we wanted to have a dialogue around when that is a reality in our lives, in our families, how do we start to have those conversations openly when there is a lot of brokenness in our family? So do you have any thoughts on just kind of entering into that decision-making matrix?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I have a similar story to you, Alex, where we started to make those decisions and have those conversations because of a couple things. One was a death in the family that was really tragic and surprising, and so it really sobered us up to think about, okay, what are we doing right with our kids? Is there anything we can do now to help them? If we were to pass tragically together, and then I had a client that every week was like, why haven't you done this? I was like, oh, yeah. And he also had some death in his family. And so part of it was I just didn't want to hear that anymore, like feeling like, hey, I'm supposed to be helping you, but okay, yeah, this is good advice. But the other thing was we went on a vacation. Yeah. We were going to Miami, and it was like, we got to get this figured out. We don't know what's going to happen. And so I think my story's similar to yours, right, of thinking about it late. My first observation from the podcast last week was I think the person that's bringing it up, right, has to be at a level of emotional maturity to really be thinking about that, to be aware of, hey, I'm in this space where I'm thinking about my family from the past and how it's impacted me, and I'm also thinking about my own family and the decisions I want to make for them, and this is messy. And I think it takes a mature, right, emotional person to be at that place. And the other thing I think is, the lawyer you had on. What a great guy to have in the kingdom, right? Someone that loves Jesus, but is also very has a very good grasp on the law. Yeah. And so the first thing would be that, right? Is the person is at a certain place to be able to have that dialogue or think through it well. If I'm counseling somebody through that, I think I'm just trying to be really curious about their family story. Like I'm more, probably my role is why is it broken? What's the trauma? Why are you having this, right, dilemma? And so my role would be trying to help them just process through, how did I get to this place? Right.
It's good.
Would that be something where you would with the potential to find a solution to where maybe they could work through some of that, or you might just go, okay, there's probably no resolving this conflict?
Oh, yeah, I would. I mean, my hope would be the first one.
Yeah.
Right. That there's going to be a solution, but I think we do run into, hey, there probably isn't. But I think the diligent task of just getting to know, okay, what's the trauma, what happened, even almost itemizing the hurt, right, and saying what is this hurt that you're trying to work through. And it is a good question. I think you asked a great question, which is this salvageable, right? Can my family get to the place where if I die, I can leave my kids with them, right? And so I think it does motivate, right, that energy towards it.
And I think when we think about wills, guardians, we naturally think it has to be family, or it has to be in our family of origin. And I don't know where that comes from, if it's traditional, if it's kind of how it's always been. But I think also getting to the place where when we're looking at maybe the dysfunction or trauma in our family of origin, we can say, okay, well, not everybody needs to choose someone in their family. And maybe even like being open to, you know, what are other solutions? Are there people that maybe aren't in my family that are like family? I mean, even in my own situation, like my parents aren't the people that are necessarily going to get my kids when, I mean, if Ben and I were to pass away. But I mean, we kind of spread ours out between different people. And so I think even like being open to, like, there's a lot of pressure. And I think our trauma and dysfunction are highlighted when we get to things like wills and death. But it's also like there are other solutions. There are other really great and healthy solutions that are not any less for your kids or for your own life as you're looking into it. But there's so much pressure around it too.
Well, I think a couple things. Like, one reason to have this conversation is because if you don't set these things up, then it is that, I mean, I think that's probably where the tradition comes from, like next of kin. That's who in a court, like, it's going to go to your family, you know, and then, you know, they can wrestle through all the obligations and all that kind of stuff maybe later. But if you don't go and make those choices for yourself, then someone else is making that choice for you. And usually it's going to be, you know, if you don't make that choice, it's probably going to be your family or a sibling or whatever. And I do think it gets complicated when, you know, you have a family and you're like, hey, there's that pressure if you're chosen. Maybe if, you know, your siblings are like, hey, out of anybody, like, we trust you guys and we want you to take care. And if you're like, I don't know that we're in the same spot. Like, yes, we would say yes to taking care of your kids and taking that on. But I don't know if we're in the same spot for, you know, saying if we passed, we would give, you know, our kids and trust you with them. And I think that's where things kind of can get complicated inside of families with this part of the conversation as well, because there is so much, I think, nuance to that conversation as well. So I think that's another reason to think through this kind of stuff, though it is morbid, because you're going to make the decision. Otherwise, you know, a court somewhere that has no relational equity is going to just make that decision for you based on just, you know, paper and facts and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So we're having this conversation, and maybe we're not, maybe we already have a will, but maybe there's something where it's like there's trauma and there's dysfunction, and I'm noticing it. I feel like a lot of times it comes up as a feeling of, I don't feel comfortable, or there's something about this person, or maybe it's a bigger thing where this is family dysfunction or abuse, or you can recognize your trauma. But let's talk a little bit about how do we recognize that there's a problem that needs to be addressed? Like, it can't be ignored anymore. Like, we're facing this head on. How do we begin to recognize that?
Yeah. I think, if you want me to speak to that, I think if it's coming up within you, I think you listen. I'm kind of, my approach in therapy is I think it's really good to listen to what your voice is saying, because oftentimes, you know, voices from the past or what culture has told you kind of speaks for you. And so anytime you have hesitation or something comes up, I think you want to be real curious about it and get to know, hey, what is it? Why does this keep coming up for me? And I think that can open up that exploration process, right? And so I think it is even probably getting into counseling, right? Or talking to someone you trust at least to start to explore, I feel this way about my family, or I feel this way about the situation, and help me unpack this, right? Help me make sense of it.
Do you have anything, any thoughts on that? Because I think one of the gifts that we have, and for those that don't listen every week, like, we have a gift of, like, as a church, we have CityCare Counseling, which is such a great resource next to us. And every week we literally have a therapist from CityCare Counseling on our podcast. And so if you just know Jess as, like, the mom, and which is awesome, a great title that she has, or just a podcast person, you know, that's the elite title that she has. But, you know, she is a therapist and has a lot of thoughts for that. And so sometimes maybe we forget, like, it's great to have multiple voices speak into these kinds of things, and such a gift for us, like, on the podcast to have you, but also not to set either of you up to be like, hey, this is the this is the perfect expert on this. And so I love getting the chance today to hear from both your perspectives on it for sure. So I want to just put that out there that like Jess would love to hear, even your perspective on some of these things too.
I also think, just to tag on to what Nate is saying, is that you have like an internal voice that's speaking. And I think like as we talk about like our gut, there are things, and I think it's like also like God given, like the Holy Spirit like gives us these red flags in our life. And I really think like when we're, especially like if we're walking with the Lord and we're recognizing something, maybe we don't always have the answers, but I just have seen so many times God be so faithful, even in a therapy session where he's just like revealing and he's calling and he's giving these red flags. And then I also think that there are people, like when we have friends or people in our life that he also uses those, or we're also able to rely on those people to help us address, and I think that those are the people that give us the courage sometimes to take the next step. I like how you said, even like getting into therapy, when you get to a roadblock, it's like, I don't know which way to go. It always is helpful to have somebody that doesn't have a bias towards your family or towards you to just give you honest and open feedback. But then it's like, how do we begin to understand the dynamic of dysfunction in family? Because a lot of times, I mean, I've like done some research even this week, and I've seen several pieces of research that say, once we realize that our family is dysfunctional, it's not like we've been in it for a couple years. I mean, this is like, we're realizing it when it's been at least a decade. At least a decade you have been in something that's either been traumatic for you or dysfunctional. And that's like the minimum. It's sometimes much longer than that. And so it's like, how do we begin to understand that? And I think it affects us in big ways.
And I guess the question from that is like, is there such a thing as a family without dysfunction? Or are there I mean, I would assume most of us have dysfunction in our family, or at least I'll be the first to say there's levels of dysfunction inside of my family, and you don't realize it because because this is how it functions. This is how family functions. And until you kind of get out of that function, you see how other families function. You're like, oh, this is a little bit broken. Like every church, every church is dysfunctional at some point. And so how do we start to navigate maybe what levels of dysfunction are, actually creating chaos and wreaking havoc on our lives, or need to be addressed, versus just like, hey, it's just dysfunction. There's just people, our family just does weird things. And so I guess I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I think it helps me to define dysfunction, maybe family dysfunction. I read it somewhere that family dysfunction is just internal like tension in a family system that like supersedes or trumps, a sense of belonging or basic needs, right? So like basic needs meaning security, significance, right? Being known. Some of our core longings are sort of taken over by the tension that arises, whether it's parent-child conflict, whether it's conflict with someone and themselves, let's say, if it's depression, anxiety. But usually that can lead to dysfunction. And I think you're correct. I don't know if there is like, hey, that's the functional family. I think even the healthiest of families have some dysfunction. I think that's just a result of the fall, right? And so I think levels is probably a good way to put it, because I would say my family has some dysfunction, but it's great childhood, great family, still talk with them, still hang out with them. But there was some things that I sort of look back as a counselor and went, oh, that was odd, oh, that was a pretty sheltered upbringing. That probably led to that. I also noticed, I don't know if you guys have run into this, but I feel like the spouse always has sort of the insight on, hey, why does your family do this?
Yeah.
I hear that
The
a lot
fresh
in counseling.
eyes.
Yeah. It's like they can look at these traditions or things that are normal to you and go, that's not normal. That's not normal at all. Which I think is the difficult part of dysfunction is a lot of times we normalize to it. And so it is, it may be 10 years that we've been through it, but it may be another 10 before we actually start to do anything about it. I think it's just very interesting how that delay happens.
Yeah, and I think it's why it's important, like anytime I get to do a wedding or whatever, like doing good premarital counsel, for that, like asking difficult questions about, how you know, family structure, how you discipline, like who did what in your house, who handled them, like all these simple things that you're like, we're just going to go figure that out together. But like pre-thinking about that, not just reactively responding to it, set you up to have those conversations that can make a train wreck later on when you both walk in with different expectations from your family of origin. And all of a sudden you're like, no, mom's supposed to do that, or dad's supposed to do that, or and so it creates these unmet expectations that nobody ever said out loud that I think are important as well inside of, family systems. And as you're beginning to build some of that kind of stuff. And so, I think to speak to that and to identify that, especially from a spousal kind of relationship, is usually one of those first people that can see that and speak to it in your life. So that's good.
And I think understanding it, to me, means doing the work of looking back and seeing, where did my mom come from? Where did my dad come from? Where's my extended family? And then what do you see your parents or maybe siblings or whoever's in your family, how are they playing that out? Because really it's a system that's functioning and working. It's that cycle. And I think we talked about it a couple weeks ago, where it's like, to take the effort to break the dysfunction and cycle means you putting a shield up and doing the work of stopping something, and then how do I function in a new way? And so I think understanding it means looking back, and it also means, I think, opening up vulnerability of how has it affected me, and how do I need to change, or what things do I need to do to heal and to not continue a cycle of dysfunction.
Yeah, it's like learning and healing from it, right? Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Looking back, right, really charting it out. There's even, there's a lot of resources I think that are helpful that say, hey, you might be in a dysfunctional family, right? And so are you the heroes or scapegoats? Is there a black sheep? It is really fascinating how you sort of, some of these kids fall into these roles, even as they get older, and they're sort of talking about like, I could do no wrong. Like my siblings, oh boy, but Mia is great.
So how do family systems or narratives impact families for generations?
Yeah. So I've been reading this book. I probably shouldn't bring it up because I'm probably going to do a poor job of representing it. But it's called It Didn't Start With You, and it's by Mark Wolyn, I think. It's like Wolyn, I think. But he talks about like generational trauma, where it's very possible that not only do the behaviors get passed down, but also even how your central nervous system reacts. Like that could be passed down from generation to generation. In his book, he did a study on, or someone in his, he quoted in his book, did a study on like Holocaust survivors, and that the next generation after them had lower, amounts of cortisol in their system. So something from what they went through was passed down. And so it's fascinating. I don't know how much I buy into it. I'm really starting to get to know the material, but it is really fascinating. I think there can be things that get passed on in our genes that's not just eye color and hair. I think it can be trauma. I think our cells can sometimes hold that trauma. I have an example, I think. Growing up, my dad grew up in a family of 10. His oldest brother, when my dad was 3, his oldest 2 brothers went off to the Korean War, and one came back. And right off the bat, there's the trauma introduced to that family, right? And what was even worse is a POW. They actually found him in 2016, which was, maybe a different story sometime. But also in that family system was the youngest brother died in the Vietnam War. And so there is this trauma within the family that impacted it greatly. And it played out for me. I can remember when I was like 5, I was having nightmares and crying because I thought I was going to get drafted and go to war. And so I'm holding this trauma, which doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't know how much of the story I knew, but there was this fear of this thing happening. And so I think that's some ways that I think the family system can impact down, is sometimes the traumas that they've gone through can really get played out in the future. And it reminds me of scripture of like, hey, this is going to affect like 5 generations, right? Whatever happens here. And so to me, that ties in. I
think during this time of year, like it's easy, I think maybe January to October to kind of just sweep it all under the rug. You don't have to deal with family as much, gatherings, and you can kind of, skip things here and there. But it seems like with holidays, Thanksgiving and just our cultural, celebrations of Christmas and things like that, these are times where for some people they really look forward to and some people dread. And I think a lot of times part of that's around the ability to set, boundaries for our family members and say, hey, there's the cliches of, hey, no politics at Thanksgiving, or religion or politics. Let's not talk about those. And not just cliches. I think they're healthy boundaries, but how do we start to, like, if I'm realizing I'm walking into a Thanksgiving meal in a couple weeks and I'm dreading it because I'm not, this isn't an actual story, but I'm just saying for this person.
I know we
Sorry.
all.
It's like we're recording this.
if I'm walking into that situation and I'm dreading it because I know, maybe there's something I don't want talked about or whatever that boundary is, but I'm kind of scared to introduce that boundary. How do I begin to do that well? Are there ways in that kind of scenario, maybe at large with the family to do it? Do I just send out a group text to everybody? Do I text everybody individually? Like, how do I start to go about that to set those boundaries and then not just set them? Because for me, I think there's times where like I've set boundaries or others have set boundaries, but then how do I maintain, those appropriate boundaries when, there's that sibling that's like, oh, I like to push the boundaries and test this, or that's a stupid boundary. So does that question make sense?
Yeah.
Ugh, that's a tough one. I mean, just because I think that, right, we start at politics but I'm thinking back to the person that asked this original question, and I don't think that it was about politics. I think it's about probably abuse or trauma or relational with, I'm just assuming, I have no clue who this is, but I'm assuming it's not like those are the hard subjects. But when we're looking at like the grand scheme of things, I'm like, what's a easy thing and what's not? But I think when I'm talking to somebody and it's like, okay, what's a good boundary? I always describe boundaries as a boundary keeps us in relationship with somebody. So what do I need so that I can be in relationship with you? You're my family. I want to maybe be around you, or it's difficult for me, but if for me to be with you, this is what I need. So when you think about it like that, you're not keeping somebody away. It's like, what do I need to keep them in? I think one of the easiest things to do is to not overdo the boundaries too, where it's like, okay, like if you have 10 or 15 boundaries that you need to do to function in your maybe a family dinner, that's going to overwhelm you. So maybe it's when a subject gets too heated, I just need to get up and walk away. Maybe that's the beginning. Like what's the easiest, most logical or something that you can picture yourself doing? So I'm always like also going through scenarios with people like, okay, this happens. Let's role play it. Like what are we going to do?
Yeah, that's a great answer. I really love that. And I would say, the boundary to protect, right? And so I think, these meals and Thanksgiving, they have a lot of hype behind them and they seem like a big deal. And really these boundaries are probably something that you're trying to do for a long stretch of time. And so
exactly.
I think to sort of come in with guns a-blazing could actually cause, more maybe tension. And so I think it is good. I think the individual conversation, I just lean towards that, right? Maybe it's not sending out a big email, but I think it does depend just on where the family's at. And I think it's like a value thing, right? So it's not so much pointing out their behavior and how everybody thinks they shouldn't be talking about this. It might be more of, hey, we just really value this. We want to spend a lot of good time with you and really don't want to talk a lot about that. Like we want to have, want our kids to enjoy Uncle Steve, right?
And I think it, like exactly how you said it, is a great example of how to communicate it. Because I think there's different ways we can do that, right? I could say, hey, like you're always bringing this up at Thanksgiving, and I just don't even say anything. Like I don't even want to talk to you about it. But to your point, where how you just explained that, that's a great way of communicating. Like. What you're thinking.
Yeah, I think it's sort of working on self, right? You can't control the other person, but you can yourself, I think, within reason. And so really think about, regulating that emotion, right? And so the work you're doing of having people practice that really is really good work, because I think that needs to happen. We need to regulate our emotions so we don't, take it to that next level.
And that really does also help with if you have high anxiety around family to even, I mean, it sounds goofy to talk through it or to think through it, but it really is therapeutic to have already thought through or processed through what's going to happen or potentially happen before it gets there.
Yeah, the brain loves a good script, right? It loves to know, okay, this is what I'm going to do in this situation. And when the situation pops up, to have like, oh yeah, I practiced this, I thought through this, it really does, I think, help.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're in that situation, you set the boundaries and it's kind of going sideways, you would say maybe remove yourself from that situation, or that's why maybe the role play or the scripting is better. So you can kind of already set yourself up for worst case scenario in that kind of situation. Is there a way that you would say, hey, man, that blew up.
Sure.
I set the boundaries, I failed. And now at what point do I just stop, engaging in that kind of conversation if you've set the boundaries? Because I think a lot of people rightfully set boundaries. I think that the tough thing is like when those get crossed, how do you continue to move on and maintain?
Yeah. I really like, thinking through like value again. And so if someone's really passionate about their view and they're pushing it on you, I think sometimes it can be disarming a little bit to say, man, I love your passion, right? I just love that you have this. And I can see that. And that's what I've always appreciated about you, right? That can sort of turn it from, hey, we're going to talk about this topic, to, hey, this is what I love about you as a brother, right, or uncle or whatever, aunt. I think that can be helpful. But I do agree. I mean, some people need really strict boundaries, right? I mean, there's some really harmful family members that it will use situations like this, right? I mean, maybe they're, sort of chomping at the bit to, hey, I can't wait to disrupt the family system. And again, I think it comes back to just, I don't know, having that ability to absorb some things and just know, yeah, this is going to be tough. This is probably going to suck this year. And so maybe I don't, right, really try to stand my ground, but at least be regulated and able to really take it on.
And I think when someone, if you have a boundary and somebody crosses that, to not internalize that as a fail for you.
Yeah.
Because you've done more by setting a boundary and knowing what you deserve and what you want out of the situation. And really, then it's having the mindfulness to say it's about them and they're not somebody that's going to respect my boundaries. And so to kind of almost change your thinking, because it really is. I mean, you're saying like creating a new script. There's a script that's in every family of kind of how situations go down and how things flow. And so when that's been written for years and years, I mean, it feels like you're going up. It's like David and Goliath, except David maybe doesn't feel like he wins in every scenario, but it feels so huge to go up against it. And so it's like not seeing that as a fail for you and not seeing that as reflective on you, but to be able to say, okay, this is another person. And also I think being a safe person, maybe this isn't a safe person in your life.
Yeah.
So how do we begin to break some of these negative family cycles that we have either identified or encountered in different ways? Or if we're a parent, is that something we can start? I can start with us to say, am I passing this down to the next generation or that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it does, right? Again, I think it starts with what can we control, and it is us, and we have more control over our family system, right? This intermediate that's coming together, especially if you're married and have kids. And so I think it is doing the work of understanding, okay, where did my family maybe, and again, I think some of this starts with tragedy as well, right? I think we can easily say, hey, this person's just dysfunctional, happens that way. But, how did that, whatever the point of this all starting, right, the origin story, whatever it is, how can we sort of change the course in our family, right? So how do we deal with stress or our own internal struggles, right? Like, so maybe we go to counseling or we go to someone and try and get some help to make sense of how we're doing. I think it is being committed to the little changes, right? Because we're talking about generations moving forward, and it just takes a long time, right? To again, you had 10 years you didn't know. I mean, whatever the years are, you've got a system within you that's really been building and you're trying to change it. And so some of that's just patience, right, for the incremental changes, I think.
You guys think it's ever wise to just like choose the road of passivity or just like being cordial? Like I can think of, examples like with an aging grandparent or something like that, where it's like, maybe you found out things about their past or you found out traumatic things that had been done to your parents or whatever, but like for the sake of mom and dad, let's just all get together this year. Let's just bite the bullet, or sometimes maybe it's passive and like, let's just make up an excuse for why we can't come home for Thanksgiving this year, when it's really because I don't want to have to deal with this. Like, is that ever the wise choice to make, or how would you navigate that if somebody's like, sitting in either of your offices right now looking at Thanksgiving and they're like, I just don't want to deal with it, and I'm just not gonna show up. I'm not gonna tell them why. Usually I think everybody can assume why, or they have the ability to write their own scripts at that point. So
I think we view passive, what'd you say, passive, cordial, quiet,
just deal
as
with it.
weak. And I'm thinking, I just like, maybe no, people haven't been there, but like, people are yelling around the table and there's one quiet person. It's like, why aren't you saying something? Like, why aren't you doing that?
Yeah.
And it's like, man, sometimes the quiet, passive people are the most powerful in the situation because they're not engaging. And I think that also takes a lot of control. I think sometimes maybe that's better than engaging and fueling a fire. And so I think it's really like, okay, for me in the situation, like, what would I normally do? Has it worked? And then what can I do different? Maybe I need to try this Thanksgiving or this Christmas to let somebody else talk or not say something. I don't know. I think that there is a time to be quiet and a little passive, and I don't think that it's weak.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it is looking at is this healthy for me? Is this healthy for my family? Do we need to just take this year off? I don't know if that's passive. That might actually be an assertive approach because it will maybe cause waves depending on the family. But there's times where in the office I'll just, I don't know, maybe just throw somebody off. I'll just say, you don't have to go. Right? You can do it. You can go home and cook your own turkey. You don't have to go to that. But I have, so it is sort of working through. Hey, there's some rules, some family rules that might even be invisible that are being visible now that, you could take some time off.
And Nate, it's not going to be Christmas without you. Like if
Right.
you, like, grandma's only got a couple more, and if your family doesn't show up, like this is maybe her last Christmas, So I think sometimes there's those family dynamics that come into play where it's, and then you haven't vocalized why you're really not showing up, and then all of a sudden, so how do we, because that's probably a form of dysfunction and manipulation in some families. So how do you press into that? You give that advice to someone, and then they come back to you like, yeah, that we decided that, and then my mom or my dad or whoever just laid it on me, that guilt trip, and I have a heart, and I can't not see grandma, the last time. Like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sure Jess will nail it. But I do think that that's part of that system, right? It's the language of that system, and of course it pulls on your heart because that's what it's always done, right? And it may not be insidious, right? They may actually that may just be the first thing that comes in their mind. And I don't know. I don't know what I'd tell somebody. I think I might just encourage them that, hey, I'm sure there's other days outside of Christmas that exist, right? This isn't the last day, and so. Maybe that needs to be, I understand it's the last Christmas, but we're going to see Grandma next week and the week after because we see her every week. And so I don't think that's the problem. I don't know.
I also think if you get talked into it, I'm just like, I'm all about not beating ourselves up in this because I think that we tend to like take on the weight when it's we feel the family expectations. If you go, a lot of times I'll say to people I'm meeting with, okay, when are you going and when are you leaving? Because you don't have to go 3 to midnight. You can come 5 to 7 and be done. And I think mentally it helps us to feel in control in settings when we're out of control to know this is when I'm coming and this is when I'm going. Whether you're single or if you're married or you are with somebody else, it's like you have a teammate to go through it with you, but maybe you need somebody to have accountability with you with that, to text you to leave. But it's like, I think it's also maintaining control, and that also is empowering in the situation too. But it's also like where you're unraveling maybe years of dysfunction or trauma that you're just processing. And you're not going to be perfect overnight. You're not going to walk into the next holiday maybe and nail it 100% perfect on how you envisioned yourself going through it. But just knowing that it's taken years, and we even said like takes decades of dysfunction sometimes before we realize it. And so it's like, okay, that takes time. It's not an overnight thing. And I think that's the frustrating part too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you got to examine your motives, I think, right? And so if you are not going because you're trying to make a statement or sort of maybe a revenge type of thing, right? I think you got to examine that. I mean, that's not the correct response to it, right? It might be, yeah, I know it's uncomfortable. You probably just need to go, right? It is grandma's last. So I just think there's so many varieties to how we may counsel somebody on this, just really depending on right situation and what position they're coming from.
So one thing that's inevitable is the conversation about politics, religion, maybe past hurt, things like that. Is there a good way to turn those conversations, to navigate that to a way? Because I mean, sometimes I think people have perceptions of who you are as an individual, and maybe they think they're helping you because they have a better perspective than you, and they're desperate for you to hear their perspective to try to sway you or whatever.
Sure.
And like, how do you navigate that conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is the uncomfortable part, right? This is good. I think, again, you look at your motives, and I think you got to look at their story too, right? Really, what are they trying to do here?
Yeah.
Right? They may, want to evangelize you to a political party because they feel like that's good for your soul, and you may disagree, but you may see like, hey, they really care about my soul, right? And so it might be something where you say something like that of like, I know you really care for me, and you really think this is important to me. I'll read it. I'll look at it. I'll actually look at it, and if you're willing to have a dialogue with me, and if we can keep it civil, then I would love to talk to you about it. I know that's not always the case, right?
Yeah.
And it's usually like this quick argument, and tempers rise really quickly, and so that's maybe one way. The other one might just be, hey, I gotta go. Right, I got to stamp and just leave this conversation. I'm not leaving the party. I'm just going to go watch football instead of have this conversation because I don't know. I think it's going to go where I think it's going to go. And I love you, but I'm going to go over here.
Yeah, that's a tough. I mean, is that your inner monologue, or is that your
probably.
outer? Like, are you actually saying that? Like, I know where
that's
this.
Great. Yeah.
Because like, if I were to say I know where this is going to go, and then I walked away, I feel like that would lead to a bigger argument.
It
down
might.
the road,
Yeah. Well, I think I know your audience, right? Like, how are they going to receive this? I'm sure there's been because I think we all learn ways that we can sort of dodge it, peacefully. And so, I think the script, practicing it beforehand, because again, there's something about holidays that really does bring up hey, this is going to be the place that we all express our political views and all these other things that are in the culture right now. For some reason, I don't know why holidays is it's like get the big table and everybody's like, hey, let's just put it all out here, right? With the food. And so,
well, and I think it's interesting because when you're growing up in a household, you tend to kind of default to mom and dad's opinions. Or big brothers or whatever. You kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, that's what I think. And then you spend years away from that, and siblings and uncles and aunts and parents, we start to maybe develop differing opinions. And then you come back these once or twice a year, and everybody gets in the same room. And it's like, I think you have this nostalgic view of when times were simpler because we all kind of just agreed.
Yeah.
And now you're like, I got to stand by my conscience too, but you don't want to just be the one who's labeled as the negative one or the one who's trying to start a fight or the contrarian. But my views have changed, and here's why. And can we talk about? I don't know. Sometimes that stuff is just really, really challenging to go through.
Yeah, I think especially if you're one, right? One against like 12.
Yeah.
Right? And it kind of seems like it's almost like they've rehearsed their approach. I think that's really challenging. And again, I think it's maybe this truth in love, or even just courage in love to say, I'm just really firm on this. And you guys don't have to accept my beliefs, but I want you to love me. Right? Yeah. Is that possible? Can we do that? Can we have this conversation in love? Mark Yarhouse, he has a concept. He calls it like convicted civility. And so you're trying to bring up a really tough topic, but you're just being really kind and doing it. And I think that takes practice.
Yeah.
I don't do that well all the time myself.
And because it is tough if you're, like, man, I've seen your life going off the hinges or whatever, and it is out of love that you see that and you're like, yeah, I'm not going to text you about this. That's not appropriate to have this conversation. And this is like our one time, this is like face to face. And I value that face to face interaction because we see each other as human there. And so sometimes you kind of go in with like an agenda of like, and out of love. Like I've done probably that too, with people. And I'm like, hey, okay, when am I going to pick the time or space where we're just sitting there and I can, bring this up and everybody's kind of got a different emotional, intelligence and all that kind of stuff. So it can be difficult to walk into that. But what about like if we're walking into, a spot consistently where, we're expecting to have comfort, joy. I mean, that's, I think, what family brings. That's what food brings. That's what probably a lot of this central stuff around a holiday or a birthday party, whatever it might be, that brings us together, those excuses to get together. And we're supposed to feel joy. And every time we leave, like, we feel let down, like we didn't experience that nostalgia that Eric talked about. And it's not a safe place. How do we start to find, I guess, pockets of comfort, pockets of joy inside of these moments that we have that are just kind of changing when we're realizing there's dysfunction with our families.
Yeah.
That's really sad. I mean, it's something I think that you look at and you have an expectation. I think it's an expectation. It's a desire that like hits on like deep core, like longings to be loved and accepted by your family or who you're with. And so I think when there's that loss, it's also to recognize it's a deep loss and it's a deep grief.
Yeah.
And it's okay. I think it's even needed to grieve the fact that maybe a place that you once felt safe or you thought was something wasn't. And I think that there's this space, and there's this hope for us as believers that the Lord can redeem those spaces. And I've seen that. I've experienced that even in my own life. And I'm so thankful. But there are spaces where it's like, I think whatever we're dealing with, if we've lost that comfort or joy or we weren't expecting it, that Jesus is there. And I just think back to, Jesus wept and he wasn't thinking of anything else. He knew the glory to come and he knew that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. I don't know if it was minutes later, but we know it was going to happen. But he meets us where we're at and he meets us in our feelings. And I think that we can find that comfort and joy in him.
Yeah.
I could keep going on, but go ahead, Nate.
I agree. I think we got to really look at what is comfort for us, right? I think a lot of times we dissociate, especially in trauma, right? It's very natural. That was probably a survival mechanism in us to be able to check out because we didn't have the capacity to handle it. Yeah. And so sometimes our comfort habits need to be examined because there might be things that we're doing that really doesn't lead us to comfort, right? It just distracts us, keeps us off track, and then maybe we feel relief, but maybe not comfort. And so I think grief, what she brought about grief, I think that's so important, right? As you're learning these things, sometimes just something you can't do, right? It's sort of like death. There's not a lot you can do to change that, but you can grieve. And so, and I think Christ's example is perfect there, right? He even knew he was going to raise him up, but he still was entering a grief process, right? Yeah. And so I think that's important. Maybe even lament, right? Like learning how to just cry out to God and just long for comfort, right? Like, God, how long will I feel this lack of comfort or tension? Lord, I long for it, right?
I think one of the fears people have, because you guys brought up, and I think for some of these things, if there's deep trauma, like therapy is just something that's needed. Counseling is something that's needed, professional counseling. And I think one of the fears, just like people from going to a medical doctor sometimes is like, what are they going to find in there?
Yeah.
Like, I know that there's some sickness, things aren't feeling right, but what are they going to find and how much is this going to cost? Not just monetarily, but like pain and suffering. And I don't want to go back and relive that. And I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. I can just keep stuffing it down. So just what is it if somebody's in that spot and they're like, okay, I know it. I know I'm unhealthy. I know I need to see a doctor, a therapist for my mental health. What are they going to find? Like if they say, all right, I'm going to book that appointment. Like, what's that, I guess, look like for both of you if somebody's coming in and they've made that courageous step? How can you help disarm maybe those feelings that are keeping someone from taking that bold, courageous step?
Yeah, I think, you've got people that are trained to help keep that a safe, right, process, right? And so as you come in, yeah, it is. I think it's excruciating at times, right? Because and people that know there's something underneath, like what they're going to find, probably knows there's something there because of just ways that they're interacting with their like relational culture. And so they know, hey, something's off. And so I'm going to find something. And so I think just to know that when we go in there, I think we're gentle, right? Meaning like, we're going to explore your family, but we're not going to take you farther than what your capacity is right now. And so we'll actually stop sometimes in session to go, whoa, this is, I see your emotions rising, or you seem to be, there's things in your body language that's telling me you're ready to stop. And so we're going to stop. And then we're going to work with you on grounding skills or ways to get you calm so that when you leave here, whatever was put in a box when you got here, we're going to put it back in. And every time you come back in, we'll just open it back up, right? With the level that you are. And yes, I'll push you sometimes, and sometimes this will be tough. But this will be pushing you towards thriving, right? Giving you strength and resiliency so that you can actually experience joy at the end of this, as opposed to just, the continued process maybe of just trying to distance yourself or dissociate and keep away from it.
That's good.
When I first meet with people, I'm always like safe place with no judgment. And I say that like often when we're approaching something, I'm like, this is a safe place with no judgment. And then also like, I feel like a good therapist is your GPS and you're the driver. This is how I like illustrate it. And so it's like, you're the driver, you decide where you want to go. You control the brake and the accelerator, and I'm your GPS. And I say, hey, maybe we should turn left up here. And if you don't turn left, I'll reroute us. But I think it's our job is to respect and honor that person and where they're at, and to keep pace with them. And I think that is it. You come in and it's like you have all these ingredients for a salad and it's all mixed up. And I think we pull things out and we'll say, okay, what's in here? What did you put in here? Or what's been put in here? And we kind of separate it out. So when you come in to process trauma or issues, it's not like we say, we're going to like dive into everything, or you have to process every memory since the day you were born. Like, we have more skills to get into it than we don't need the whole reenactment of every moment that you've been in to be able to keep that pace with you.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
Well, Nate, thank you for your time today, and thanks for the insight that you brought. I mean, are there any closing thoughts or resources you'd want to share with people that are kind of going through some of this stuff right now? Or, I mean, obviously we mentioned counseling. That's probably a big one.
Sure.
But if there's anything in addition to that.
Yeah, I think there's some great trauma therapists out there that have really good materials that are very accessible. I think of like Bessel van der Kolk. He's got The Body Keeps Score, is an excellent
really
book. Gabor Mate, I think is his name. He has a book. It's something about hungry ghosts, but it's about the sort of the trauma of neglect, which is often kind of the forgotten one, right? It's usually abuse or violence or, other stuff. So I would say those are good resources. The book I mentioned, Mark Woylan, it's an interesting book. And I think there's going to be more research on that upcoming, sort of into this epigenetic, like how do our genes pass stuff. And I think it's just a really fascinating book. So Didn't Start With You would be another one. And I could probably name way too many, but boundaries books are good if you're really just looking for language, because a lot of this is language, right? The idea of boundaries, sometimes you can come around that, but how to do it. Sometimes books like Boundaries by the Townsend, Cloud and Townsend, I think are just, they're good language books, right? To give you some ideas how to do that.
All right, great. Well, if you have any questions or concerns, you can reach us by sending us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org, or you can reach out to us on social media, on Instagram @CCCOMA podcast. We'd love to hear from you. You can always leave us a voicemail. That phone number is 402-885-9930. But until next time, we'll talk to you then.